Hey there, listeners. Welcome to Project Zero, where we hear about the journeys of some of the best project leaders in the game. My name is Alex Tuck, and I'm the host. I am here with my friend and head of professional services here at Tuck, Alex Morgan. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about your Project Zero. I know about it, but I'm excited
Yeah,
for everyone else to listen.
awesome.
Sweet.
Yeah, me too. Excited to be here.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. So, Alex, start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do here at Tuck.
Yeah, sure. My name is Alex Morgan, obviously. I am a project manager by trade historically. I'm the head of professional services at Tuck, so I lead our general engagements in the professional services channel, largely in with channel partners like ClickUp. I also do some of the implementations for ClickUp as a ClickUp certified expert of the platform and our other professional services related engagements like staff augmentation, placing a project manager in an organization, things like that. So, and from that perspective, serving as an engagement manager, technical expert, general support, and really filling in, the gaps of those services as they need.
Nice.
Historically, I've been a project manager for, I guess, about 15 years. I have a 6-year-old daughter who's currently at school, thankfully, and very sweet. And my wife and I are both working from home, living in northwestern Vermont, pretty close to the Canadian border, about 20 minutes from you, Alex. Started in project management down in New York City in the construction, real estate, and plumbing fields, and weaseled my way into IT, thankfully, over the decades, doing more digital services work. And it's been a nice transition, but also, interesting kind of perspective to have both sides of the coin.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for that intro, Alex. Let's get into how you got into project management. I know you've been in the industry for a long time, right? But how did you decide to start in project management?
Yeah. So, I mean, like many, we've talked about this with a lot of our consultants, and it's funny how many similar kind of stories there are. I've never met anybody that said, I went to school for project management, or I said, this is the career path I want, and then I got into it. I'm sure somebody has, but I've never met them. Oddly enough, though, I haven't. One of my weirdest anecdotes was when I first moved to New York, I really had no plan. I worked there with my wife, who was going to grad school, and I said, great, I'll figure it out. And I guess I did. But in the sense that when I was there, I just was doing temp jobs and various things for a few months. One of the first ones I had was at Moody's Analytics, right after a couple of years after the 2008 financial crisis. So odd time to be there and essentially doing nothing. But somebody out of the blue came up and said, hey, you seem smart. You should get into project management. And I felt so confused why they were even saying that to me, but has literally stuck with me since then. And just by coincidence, I happened to do it. I think that's a very weird, very weird story, but it probably got my head in that area. One giving me the awareness of the words project management, which I really had not heard through college, and what the concept is. Wasn't any kind of mentorship opportunity. It was really just a pure out of the blue person that happened to say this to me. And then my first full-time position was doing administrative work, but quickly moved into project management because we had projects that we didn't call projects and we had the need to manage them. So I think that part of me is just evolving out of the natural needs of a small business is obviously a common story or larger businesses. But in our case, it really started from, hey, we have all this work we're doing. We have field staff doing engineering or needing to do engineering work and then needing to install things in various buildings in New York City. And there's all of these components that go into that. Somebody needs to order this stuff. And it started pretty simple. People had been doing the work already. So it wasn't really a question of getting the tasks done. It was a question of organizing that and making it more efficient and just coming in with general knowledge of things like Excel and the ability to find other tools like Airtable and some other earlier project management tools that weren't quite as robust as things like Microsoft Project, but still allowed you to get that much more efficient management of your day-to-day work. I was one interesting start as, hey, discovering this is a field. It's on top of this other field, plumbing and engineering work, and it can live really in your various industries, of course. And it's pretty interesting. I seemed to be pretty good at it at the time. And I think that partly it was just it worked out well with our teams. But it really, I think for me, catered to some of my strengths with talking and being able to communicate with different types of people and staying on top of really the general needs and requirements and planning things in advance, general strengths one can have. But from the soft skills perspective, I think that was the first start. Specifically for me, I started working at a plumbing engineering company in New York that was working in New York real estate, and daily I was talking to plumbers, people who didn't non-native English speaking plumbers, and all sorts of people in our office. obviously different cultures and communities in New York, and then real estate executives, building supers, facilities people of across the spectrum of class and race, everything else in New York. And it was a really interesting time for me, really interesting way to learn about the ecosystem of business as a whole and the various industries at play. But like I said, catering to the strengths of, hey, I can talk to a plumber and then I can tell the plumber what the real estate person said in a way that actually gets them to know what they have to do and doesn't upset them, and the reverse. Or I can communicate what those, hey, here are the technical issues we run into that the plumbers can explain. How do I translate that into business speak or client speak that can, one, not tell them things that they either might get too worried about unnecessarily, but also giving them enough information to make the decisions they need to make. And that starting point, I think it's really kind of one of the core aspects of project management in general, but starting with those and knowing, hey, I can do this pretty well. The rest of it fell into place from there.
Yeah, I love that, and I heard at the very beginning, right, the film analytics piece, right? So I love your trajectory. So tell the audience what you studied in college.
Oh yeah, okay, that's a fun one. I just like all the other people we're talking about that had kind of fallen into or just by happenstance. I studied film and television studies, essentially, as I like to call it, Marxist cultural theory in college, and it was just basically philosophy and looking at media critically. So it wasn't completely empty, but it was just the surface, the analytical side, and also kind of movie and TV production and some interesting stuff there. But by the end of it, I really didn't feel like I wanted to get into the world of grinding as a PA on some bad TV show for 10 years in order to maybe be able to write something for TV, which some of my friends have done. And I'm happy they did, but it wasn't for me at the time. And starting with that liberal arts education, I really, in college, I didn't know at all what I wanted to study. I had 5 various things that all seemed interesting, from like physics to philosophy to film, and fell into the one I fell into. But ultimately, the learning of critical thinking analysis, just being able to put your head down and create something, or not just make a paper in a week like in high school, but a thesis or something much more robust and requiring more research. It was a good experiment for me to go away, focus my brain and help me realize the things that I enjoy better. But obviously that was very broad education, not specifically technical, nothing business whatsoever. I didn't touch econ or anything like that, even though I found it really interesting. Maybe calculus I took for kind of fun, and Mandarin Chinese I took for also fun, but nothing more technical than those two.
That's
And then
yeah,
from there, like I said, I moved to New York without a plan and thought, there's film and TV work out here. There's journalism. There's all these things that I'm interested in that I could do. And in the 2000, whatever that was, that job wasn't the job market for the person without either experience or education in the field to try to get into the field, unless you want to literally just be the grunt running coffee, which that's what you do. So in that case, it was interesting. But I think that really, like you said, it lends itself well to, it's a project management isn't a specific technical skill set. And there's so many more general skill sets, but ultimately like we'd like to say, the soft skills, the ability to communicate and work with different people, that can come from anywhere, but it's really one of the core foundational elements of liberal arts education. Analysis, critical thinking, understanding, and just learning about different perspectives. You can miss that in business school, and you can miss that in all these other areas of education. And I think that's really foundational for this career.
yeah. I would say out of all, I mean, I think about our consulting team right now, and we're definitely over 50% liberal arts. I was liberal arts and finance, right? So I had like the
That's
mix
really,
of econ and finance, but
yeah.
I think the most important thing is having like a diverse pool of folks that are thinking about different things, right? And so I think engineers turned project managers can be a great combination, but I love having liberal arts folks on projects because they're just thinking a different way, especially folks like you that have that psychology background as well without even having the psychology degree. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's something to it for sure. And I think that the flip side of an engineering version of it, it seems, at least, from anecdotally, that the folks that would go from an engineering or technical role moving up into a management role successfully are the ones that already had or gravitated towards those same skills. It wasn't like you kind of would weed out the folks that don't have those, because you probably wouldn't want to promote them into management if they seem like they have no social skills whatsoever, of course. But that definitely seems to be the trend. Similarly, I think most of the folks on our role, on our bench and our ecosystem that are in this vaguely technical PM role, it's IT projects and similar things. You can't be a true Luddite, but they all seem to have typical aptitude that maybe it's not formal, maybe it is formal, maybe it's not, but it wasn't their bread and butter. So same idea. I think it's always this kind of balancing hybrid act. You need to have obviously those social and soft skills aspect, but you can come in from either direction as long as you can hybridize.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's give the people what they want. Most people come to the show to hear about that Project Zero, the project that you learn how to be a PM and you talk about all the failures that existed during it or the successes. But yeah, what's your Project Zero, Alex?
Yeah, let's see. I can think of a few good ones that larger projects that were very educational. Just off the cuff, we did a lot of work with some major real estate companies like LaFrac in New York and Columbia University. Similarly educational experience. I think about that one a lot. Probably the one I think first of is a larger series of, I'll describe the work, but it was for the commercial entity called Chelsea Market in New York, which is essentially a very large old building in Chelsea, New York, that's been converted into numerous food stalls, like a massive open air food market of sorts. And they do all the Food Network shows filming there and all these other things upstairs. So it's about 7 stories or so of various commercial entities, all pretty high maintenance, well-known entities, and then lots of different restaurants subdivided into an insane layout of just, you took a giant old factory and said, we're going to make this into 100 food stalls. And then they re-plumbed and re-electric, did the whole thing. And they're all very sensitive folks. So we were actually hired to go into the building and say, from our plumbing and engineering company, look at the underlying systems and say, what is going on here? How are things currently being fed water, electricity? Basically, how are they getting their utilities? And how can we subdivide things differently? And most importantly, what the goal was to basically be able to allow the real estate ownership company to individually bill all the various food stalls for their energy consumption, which if you think of your own house, you have not to get too much into water metering technology, which is not interesting whatsoever, but you have one water pipe coming into your house. You want to measure how much water is going to one sink or another sink. You need to put metering technology or other various ways to say how much of the proportion goes to one or two. And every single time you have to do that, you're talking about the water pipe. There actually are some ultrasonic metering technologies. Who cares? But you have to cut the pipe and turn off water, and it's disruptive. It's a big impact. So it was this. And these are restaurants, of course, and the Food Network, which doesn't want us to turn their water off, in any case. So all of these various, many, many, many stakeholders, plus the ownership of the building, which was not the ownership of the market. So property owner, commercial entity that actually ran the space, the hundreds and hundreds of probably 150 different vendors and other owners of their areas, facilities people, and our teams, primarily working at night. It was a very large logistical undertaking, and really no problems. I'd say, other than just the occasional, hey, this pipe doesn't go where we thought it did, and we had to turn it back on all of a sudden, logistical issues. The things we learned were much more about ways we can do things more efficiently using tools. Like, we started with spreadsheets. We moved into more robust tools like Airtable that allowed cloud saving of the information, real-time updates, things like that. And then project managing both our team and the client side, their vendors, their numerous interests, and making sure that everyone was informed and aware of what's going on. Definitely was a big undertaking. It took about 2 years total to finish all the work, and then to continue. Our company still continued to work with them and did building aspects for them. So didn't get our heads out of the sand for a long time, but it was definitely a very interesting engagement. And I think really if I think about lessons learned, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. You have lots of different types of people, the stakeholders involved are very different. We have, not to mention, in addition to all the other stakeholders involved, in the middle of the process, the building was bought by Google, who decided to keep everything the way it was, but then say, we're going to build out an entire, I don't even know, data center or something on one of the floors. We didn't get involved in that, thankfully, but just one other additional, very, sensitive stakeholder to include that was not even aware of what the work was going on at the time. So between all of those folks, it taught us a few lessons. Our team, their strengths, communicating things you need to communicate directly on site to a facilities person from one facilities person to another, making sure that it was communicated. Maybe I can't do the conveyance of information myself, but I can confirm it was done or be aware, things like that. And then otherwise, any direct communications with the restaurants, they require a different kind of touch, different kind of sensitivity than the typical facilities person. And just, it's New York. Not every facilities person speaks English at all. So me, as a monolingual person, relied heavily on our bilingual staff, coworkers, to help facilitate some of that. So despite the communication strengths, there's definitely always gaps to fill. I think it was really informative in that sense and really productive. It was a good, healthy project for everybody. We made money. All the clients did well. Nobody was super disrupted. And beyond kind of learning to go with the flow and manage many, many different types of people, I think it worked out pretty well.
Interesting. And I always think you downplay the level of interest in sonar
Water metering.
technology.
I can talk about water meters for a long time. I don't want to.
Like, whenever we start talking about it, I'm like, wow, this is so interesting. Because
Or
if you
prevent
think about it, like that stuff, that's the stuff that like runs our world too, right? Like things that we just
Yep.
take for granted, right? The way water comes into your house.
I don't take plumbing for granted ever as a not former plumber, but I at least have to, I have at least turned the water off to a building myself and had to turn it back on. And that alone, like it's just a valve, but especially in a city like New York with 100-year-old buildings, those valves will just break randomly. So you could cause damage pretty bad if you're not a trained plumber. And we had some moments like that. Hey, your entire water main exploded and it was just fragile and you don't have water for the next 2 days.
Yep.
Love it. But that's a different kind of emergency. But yeah, we run in the construction, in the area of construction where we had to worry about people literally dying. Wasn't that level of risk strictly, but water is very sensitive. We're working in hospitals, we're working in restaurants, very least we're depriving people of water, which is not good. Maybe at their income source, if they're a restaurant, or life-saving needs in certain areas. But there's sensitivity to it for one. And it's so much more. There's so much more in our entire world that's water dependent. I think people don't understand at this point, but everything AI is incredibly water dependent. Genes are water dependent, making genes. And then air conditioning in most buildings is water dependent. If you lose your water supply, your air conditioning goes out in most commercial places because at least a lot of them historically use water cooling systems. So knowing at least the scope of it is really interesting. But like you said, we were talking a bit ago of the Jeffrey Hinton interview where he recommended that in the near future for AI sustainability to keep your career trajectory intact during the future AI boom, become a plumber, the hard skills that people can't take away from you, at least for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think that's something to that. It's always been true, but it's still very true.
Yeah. I love it. He's like, if I had a kid today, I would tell him to be a plumber. Because AI is not very good at the mechanical stuff yet.
We'll see.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks for telling that story. That's fascinating stuff. And very different. It's not very different, right? The project management is not that different, right?
Mhm.
But it's very different experience than
Yeah.
what you're currently doing. That's for sure.
I mean, it's closer to, it's on-site work too. So it's much closer to something like a server installation, or, there are physical constraints involved and there are people that need to be there and stakeholders that are going to be affected when you disconnect the internet, things like that. I think it lines up very well and is similar kind of the types of impacts there are obvious kind of analogs across the board other than like electricity related, like water, electricity don't make sense, obviously, but other than that kind of odd risk that you might have to be more considerate of, or something like going into a pit where you have to be concerned about oxygen levels. That's much more specific to working in buildings in that industry than something in a server room or whatever else.
Fascinating. So wild. Cool. Let's get into some advice. What do you think the number one skill is for project managers to have today?
To get vague, I would say back to the communication aspect, just because it's very broad, but you can boil communication down, or rather, you can cover the bases in many different areas. Communication can literally be something like communicating the list of stakeholders, the list of priorities, a status report, having a meeting with folks. I think communication ability is almost too vague. I think really, to be more specific, it's the ability to understand different types of people, I would say, different types of people and their interests and what they're trying to do and communicate to you, and being able to understand it enough that you can translate the key points for anyone else that needs to know that information. And that's right. It's more of a translation skill, I'd say, than directly communication, because it goes the same way, translating the list of priorities into a status report or into a project plan. It's more similar to translation, I think, than it is to just being able to speak or hear or anything much more broad than that. But I think it really does cover almost all of the key needs. Being organized is it kind of definitely a separate piece, and there's many other kind of general traits to it versus more technical skills like knowing how AI works or knowing how various tools work. I wouldn't personally say that anyone needs to learn a specific tool in order to be a project manager. They probably should learn at this point AI generally, and almost certainly should learn a specific tool, but not one specific tool, because you need to have the technical background to be able to actually deliver the services. If you're literally just starting out and someone was willing to hire you with no experience as a associate project manager or something lower than that, whatever that role would be, you would maybe learn the tool on, you would presumably would still learn the tool on the job, but on the job training is still much of a luxury. And even in entry level positions, when the competition gets more and more fierce, I don't know how you would even get project management experience before working in a professional environment necessarily, but you can at least learn these tools, learn how various features work in tools, talk the talk, and then walk the walk once you are able to get in. I think that and some level of specific technical aptitude experience, general awareness, or really an understanding of how the AI tools work these days, not necessarily any specific one, but comfort and familiarity, because I can't imagine that's not really one of the most important skills people will need to have in the next 30 years, 10, 20, 30 years. But really in terms of things that are harder to train yourself on or learn, or things that you should try to work on long-term, it would be overall, I'd say communication, empathy, but really it's more about understanding and then being able to communicate what the necessary facts. I think empathy goes a long way, but you can certainly be an unempathetic project manager that still gets the information across effectively and people can follow the marching orders. I do think at least that we've talked about this for ourselves, and really just the same point of the necessity of the soft skills is really motivating people to work. And that is empathy and emotional intelligence. So I think you could miss that and you could still be a good project manager, but that's probably the more important thing to have ultimately. If you can get people, and maybe either of those two things, if you are a really bad generally communicator, you're not going to be a good project manager. I can't imagine a situation, but you could hypothetically be really good at motivating people to do what they need to do and communicate effectively in an agile situation or something else. So I don't know if I'd pick one of the two as the most important, but I really can't imagine us being successful consistently without both emotional intelligence, general communicative ability, and ability to translate across stakeholders. And it goes hand in hand with emotional intelligence, but it goes to the same point. Ultimately, whether you're herding cats or asking people what they did yesterday, or are they on track, people are going to need to do their work and you need to make sure that they're able to do it. So that's removing blockers, motivating them, and trying to figure out what is standing in their way, if anything, or what they need to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
It could be very personal, emotional, it could be completely outside of work. And sometimes that just requires basic empathy.
Yeah. And you alluded to, you started talking about AI a little bit and just becoming familiar with it. And I think making sure that's part of your trajectory. Like, how do you think AI is going to change project management over the next decade? Right.
Oh,
If you had a what is this?
yeah.
Glass ball, not whatever that
And
is. Crystal ball.
crystal ball. That's a really interesting one. I think a lot of the rote tasks, I mean, we've seen it already. The rote tasks across industries are going away or getting much simpler. You don't need a person to be a copywriter to write every single blog post, or rather, it's not to say that the jobs disappear strictly, but one person can write 5 times as many blogs now. One person can make 5 times as many status reports, hypothetically. I think if systems are in place to manage the projects effectively already, like tracking the tasks involved, the deadlines, general objectives or key metrics of the project, giving people information on a regular cadence, and everyone's working smoothly, obviously in a perfect world, there isn't that much to do as a project manager. If people were just able to do their work effectively and they didn't have any competing priorities, you wouldn't need to really report on status most of the time. You could set that up automatically already. So some of the tools we're using, like ClickUp, have built-in AI features for things like AI stand-up or AI summary or AI project manager, they call it, or AI status report, which would just basically look at the history of things people have checked off in the tool they're using and say, this is what they've checked off, which is that's a lot of the basic components in rote work with project management. The part that AI can't do now is to make sure people are actually doing their work or being truthful about it, or get support when they need it, or identifying the areas where they do need support. I think those tools can do a lot in terms of things like forecasting and finding the bottlenecks. For instance, you can look at two projects, and this one, and maybe they're the same type of project. One moves smoothly in 3 months and there's a certain rhythm to it. The other one is much more stuck in certain phases. You can identify those bottlenecks really automatically with AI, just through basic math, basic analysis that you don't need to do anything really with it. It's just pulling data that already exists. So the ability for AI to solve some of these other gaps, like, hey, this is taking a long time. Are you stuck? Can I help you? That sort of nudging and or the social aspect, I think absolutely realistic to be commonplace, I'd say, the next 5, 10 years, where people aren't relying on project managers to necessarily make sure they know what they're doing or make sure that they are on top of what they're doing. But the role of the project manager, I don't think it's going to go away, at least in the sense of the much more nuanced aspects of, and people aren't going to have perfect systems. So there's never going to be a perfect analysis, or at least it's not going to be perfect analysis for a long time. There's always going to be other gaps, other areas, and the data itself isn't going to be super reliable unless people are really diligent about keeping their systems up to date. And I don't think any business, almost, I'm sure there are some of the Fortune 500 businesses, but not many businesses are in such a mature and very well executed position that they are getting perfectly clear data no matter what system they're using, let alone clear enough data that AI can say, hey, this is reliable in a lot of ways. So I think it's not going to go away, the need for confirming what's real versus what's in the system, and getting people really I guess the motivational aspect, making sure that people are actually equipped to do their work, not just prodded and saying, hey, you didn't do this yet. It's due tomorrow. That's pretty easy to do. A robot can do that. A person can do it too. As a worker, am I going to respond to a robot doing it versus a robot AI? Am I going to respond to a nothing doing it as just a literal reminder that I could have set myself, better than I would respond to my friend, acquaintance, coworker, manager, whatever the role is, that is asking me for an update? The social aspect, the social pressure, like the obligation of giving your work to other people and being part of a team, that won't go away. And I don't think AI will ever be able to fill that same pressure role unless there's some really truly draconian world of, hey, here's your paycheck the minute you submit your deliverable or something like that, which maybe that's the case. I don't think that's the social skills and the social need of it is not going away. I would be pretty shocked if the role of the project manager as a whole isn't very different, though, just given that so much of this rote stuff and so much of the, hey, set up this process so that we can be sure we're filling the metrics, serving as an intermediary between the delivery team and the leadership or whoever the other stakeholders are, the clients have to be. I don't think clients are going to be satisfied with an AI tool that's telling them what the status of the project is. They're going to want to talk to a person at a certain point. Just like we all want to talk to people when they call customer service. When you have a problem and the AI is not satisfying your answers, it's especially frustrating. And I would not work with a company that didn't allow me to kind of connect with somebody, whether that's an account manager or a project manager. I guess that's up for debate. But there is never, at least in that, I can't see any disappearing in it for that human element in there. It would just be a big change of what they need to do, kind of what are the manual and menial tasks they need to do, and how much work can one person handle. I can't imagine that's going to be. I can only imagine that will increase for individual kind of productivity with AI tools.
Yeah,
But
that's
long
interesting.
term, really correct.
Yeah, I was at Agile 2025 last week. I was just chatting with someone about the future of AI, and we were talking about what AI can do, right? AI will be able to do a lot, like so much of what we do from status updating, communication. Honestly, like probably will do it better than us in a lot of
Yeah,
ways. But people don't want to talk to robots. Like they don't want to engage with this inanimate object, even if
not
they
first.
simulate it, not for a while. And sometimes you want to just like text someone, right? Instead of picking up the phone and calling. Like I just think that like that human barrier is there. It's always going to be there where we're going to want to your point, customers are going to want to talk to an actual human.
Yeah, for sure. And I think ultimately, though, it's really the longer term thing of it, I think is much more volatile, because really what people are going to be involved in projects in the future? I think that's the hard question is, it would make sense to me that a project manager role could even be more important, because if the project manager was the last remaining human involved and it's all AI developers or something along those lines, and you're the one, and AI could probably manage those as well. But if we're at some point where the AI is dictating both the success and the work itself, then we're probably pretty far in the future, I'd say. I don't think that to be necessarily the AIs are determining what the goal of the project is or anything along those lines for a very long time, maybe helping to draft the language. But that we're distant future, where we're all being replaced. It seems much more distant to me, though. How do we get there is my question, I think, because what things like developers, doing lots of developers, senior and junior developers are terrified, and they don't have entry level opportunities. They don't have training opportunities. If you're graduating from college, how do you get in the field? How do you get any experience? It seems like the answer that is being put forth by the vanguard of AI and tech companies is become an entrepreneur and figure out how to develop your own whatever skill set. I don't know how that works for the millions and millions of people personally. I don't think there's a capacity for the entire world to be merchants and entrepreneurs without somebody doing some other foundational work that provides something below us. Ultimately, there's no developers to develop things, then what's the project that you're going to manage? If the developers are all AI, then maybe that's easy for them to develop.
Yeah.
But there are still people for a long time, at the very least, the longest term thing I can think of before something really weird in society is happening is there will always be a human client, or at least there will always be some person behind the money involved that's asking for something. Not always, again, that's foreseeable, I'd say, but there's a human involved that has the definition of success in their head or has the objectives in their head. And if that person is human, there's always going to be a need for another human to, I think, manage those expectations. I think more realistically, we're going to be receiving project requests from AIs than taking humans out of our entire work sooner.
Yeah. And
some AI process or something like that.
There's always going to be a customer at the end of the day, and they need to see some sort of value created, right? And so whoever that is quote unquote buyer, right? And then they're always going to be involved, right? Until AI starts buying stuff from each other.
Yeah. And those all the James AI works really well, which frankly, I don't know. Someone who uses it every day. I'm torn in the world of listening to these podcasts and these very alarming, smart, very successful people who are talking about 2 years from now, we're going to be in a dystopia, and for the next 15 years, we'll be living in hell. And then maybe we'll be coming out of an AI paradise. When I can't even get AI to write a paragraph for me that I don't need to edit myself. Like I can't get it to do voice to text right now. I understand acceleration of technology and kind of the nature of all that. It's not unrealistic that it would move much, much faster than it already has. But still feels like there's some pretty big gaps to cover, I think, before we're being dominated by a race of robot overlords.
That is so funny. Oh man. So thanks for test driving this new question about AI and project management with me. I think that it actually is very interesting to get different people's perspectives. And you and I talk about this all day, but people have some really novel ideas about how AI is going to impact our industry. And I think it's there to enhance it for quite some time. I think we're going to see a shakeup like at Agile 2025. Is Agile really dead?
Yeah.
Or did we win? Right. There's a lot of this like, hey, maybe we won and everyone just gets Agile and appreciates it and all the values are there. And now it's time to work on the next thing. Right.
I think Agile is when we're like a CSM could easily be an AI because it's just about this stand-ups and check-in about removing blockers. And if they need to identify the blockers, then all the AI is doing is putting it together. Obviously, there's some other person involved that helps remove things, but that's a much bigger function, I think, or much bigger portion of the pie that gets taken away from that technology.
Yeah.
But that was for comparison. I was talking to some friends who are not at all technologically inclined or in carpentry, things like that. And one of them has literally never used ChatGPT. And I would love to hear what they think. They're in sci-fi worlds and things like that. They're not unimaginative people, but I would love to hear how they think things might change for other fields. And just from any perspective, I think it's all such speculative fiction at this point that it's still really interesting. But we'll see where the bubbles start to drop.
That's right. All right. That was a great session. Alex, how do people get in contact with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn at Alexander Morgan.
Cool. Well, I think that's it. That was fun, Alex. Thanks
Yeah,
for
well,
joining
thanks
me
for
today.
having us.
Yeah.
Anytime. See if I can
Uh,
find another story next time.
that's right. And yeah, and thanks to everyone who's joining us this week at Project Zero. Be sure to subscribe Project Zero wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll catch you next time with the next great project leader story. All right. Thanks again, Alex.